the newsagents.
So now, Congress, the battle for the general election is getting started. And it's not going to be easy. But this country cannot survive another 5 years of Tory rule. Ask yourself, what will be left? There's no doubt that Labour has to win. But to get this victory, we have to come together, stand together and campaign side by side. And we need your help.
That was Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, addressing the Trade Union Congress this morning, laying out what Labour's now calling a new deal for workers. And she's promising a game changer for employers as well as their workers, and talking about strengthening the power of the unions. She's laying out, as you heard, the terms for an election battle now very much on its way. So today, we're going to be asking if it's enough to pull those sceptical about Labour in from the cold, or whether it risks turning off Middle England. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's Emily. There is no John, there is no Lewis. The boys have gone off to start their own provisional wing of the Newsagents. But on today's episode, we're going to be hearing election strategy from a key Labour frontbencher after a reshuffle that many thought was the revival of the Blairite centrists. A little later, we'll be talking about spies in Westminster with a man who knows intelligence inside out. Christopher Steele, yes, he of the Donald Trump PP tape dossier. Is he surprised by the revelations of what appears to have been going on in Parliament? But first to that New Deal, the Rayner New Deal. And to be fair, it is really far-reaching in terms of what it's suggesting of the new relationship between workers and their employees, because the Deputy Leader today talked about cutting 0 hours exploitative contracts. She talked about negotiating a special wage for social care workers that goes above the minimum wage to try and attract people into the sector and make them feel valued and prepared to work in it. And crucially, perhaps most controversially, Angela Rayner has pledged to strengthen trade unions within the first 100 days of a Labour government. She's promised to repeal those anti-strike laws that were brought in under recent Conservatives and to empower workers to collectively secure better pay and conditions if her party, if Labour wins. And I guess to try and put this in context, just a week ago, last week, we had a reshuffle where the dominant word people used about Keir Starmer's new look cabinet was centrist, was Blairite. There was a moment where I guess the left of Labour wondered if there was still a place for them. And perhaps we should be seeing today's speech as the offering. The people in the party who are asking what Labour is really for, who are asking what the difference is between Tory light and Keir Starmer. This is their response to that. But at the same time, it will be gold dust to those in the Conservative Party. We've already seen a tweet from Jake Berry today, within minutes of Angela Rayner sitting down, saying this is what you get from Labour. They're promising to make it easier to strike. They're promising to bring our country to a standstill. They're promising to give the unions more power. So today, on the Newsagents, we're going to be looking at those new battle lines being drawn and talk to Peter Kyle about how Labour actually thinks it can win. Well, Peter Kyle was Northern Ireland Shadow Secretary until a week ago. Now he's covering science and technologies for Keir Starmer. I guess, Peter, we should talk a bit later about how you get your head around a new brief and whether expertise is lost in a reshuffle. But you're also leading the by-election campaign in Mid Beds, Nadine Dorries, old seat. We're going to discuss how that is going in a moment. But let's start with today, with this new deal for workers. What is that appeal? Who is it appealing to?
Our primary mission in government is to be able to get the economy growing. And the only way that we're going to be able to get the economy growing is by using every bit of potential and talent that we have in the country, starting with working people who are in work. Now, if you look at the last 14 years of the Conservative government, the first thing they did was extend the right to go to tribunals so that from 1 year to 2 years. And, has that been a success? Has that driven productivity? Has that made people safer in the workplace? I was on the parliamentary inquiry into what was going on in Sports Direct with Mike Ashley. There was a one member of staff that gave evidence to us in private. She had given birth in a toilet in one of his warehouses because she was too scared to tell people that she was about to give birth because she thought she'd get fired for it. So it is very clear that if there is a culture like that in a workplace, then there is not going to be, this is not the kind of country we aspire to be. But there is also a big impact on the economy as well as on our society, and particularly profoundly for individuals. So we just want to have a conversation with employers. This has not come out of the blue. It's not come out of nowhere. This won't be a surprise to employers because we've been engaging with employers for a very long time about this. We've also been engaging with unions. This is the kind of grown-up set of conversations that a party that aspires to government should be having. It's exactly what we did with minimum wage in the 1990s when we approached government in that era. And we're just thinking, what is good in our economy at the moment and needs accelerating? Where are the challenges and emerging challenges in the economy and what needs tackling? And that is the basis of Angela's speech today.
So just take me through some of the pledges, promises. An end to 0 hours contracts.
An end to 0 hours contracts because it is very clear that they are broadly exploitative. There are some people that have been pointed out that actually benefit from them. But we believe that there are ways of accommodating those people who are students who want the kind of flexibility that come with those sorts of relationships with online
So those
apps.
are going to be illegal. They're going to end.
It will certainly be illegal to bind somebody in to a contract with you, so an exclusive contract with an employer, but no guarantee of pay or hours or work. That is what a 0 hours contract does. And we now know that there are tens of thousands of people who are wholly dependent on one employer but have no guarantee of an income. I mean, how can that possibly be the case in Britain in the 2020s?
Talk to me about social care, because it sounds like you're saying we've got a minimum wage, but social care lives in a special sort of role of its own. We're desperate for people to work in social care. Is that going to have its own wage, which is above the minimum wage?
So what we want to do is do a sector deal. We are looking at whether other sectors would benefit from the same approach, but we certainly want to start with social care. It is very clear that the market for labour in the social care sector is wholly broken. There are people who are on minimum wage, wholly on minimum wage. There are highly skilled people, very highly skilled people, who are doing a social good for our country, as we discovered, obviously, during COVID, in quite an extreme circumstance. And the market is not delivering a fair wage for the level of skills that they have, which is why the market has become so wholly dependent on imported labour and labour that's coming from overseas. It's not working for anyone.
So how high does that have to be? I think the minimum wage sits about £10.40, right? Where would you put a social care wage?
You're going to be really frustrated with me because you know what the answer is going to be. It's going to come from a consultation with the sector at the point at which we would hopefully assume government, and at that period.
But it would have to be presumably significantly higher than the average wage to say you're not just going to work in a pub, you're going to literally sort of take care of somebody's life.
We will do so in consultation with the sector and the unions and the workforce itself, and we will do so in a way that can attract the talent, reward the level of skills that people have, and once again make social care desirable. I mean, when I was a policy advisor back for the last Labour government, I went to some other countries and funnily enough, went to schools and was stood in front of. I was going on a. It was about social care and getting people into some aspects of social care paid for by the state. That work. The first place they took us to was a school because they wanted us to stand in front of a classroom and then somebody asked the question, "What do you want to do when you leave school?" A third of the kids in that school put their hand up and said that they want to be social workers or care workers. And, so people in other countries aspire to go into these sectors. In our country, they simply don't. So we have to, it's one area where I think people accept we're going to need some kind of government intervention to make that market work, particularly in an era when we're moving towards an ageing population, and we want to make working in that sector desirable. It can only come from a partnership, a relationship, and a set of discussions and negotiations with care home providers themselves in all sectors, because there is charities running it, there is private companies, a lot of private companies, and there is also, of course, local authorities. But we will have that conversation in the same way we did with minimum wage in the 1990s, and I believe it'll have the same impact. I would be astonished if any future government would roll back on what we intend to do in the care sector.
And let's talk about collective bargaining and the unions, because it sounds as if the threshold for striking will be lower now. You don't have to get to the 50%. Are you sure that's going to be popular with the public after a year of strikes?
I'm not entirely sure of the detail of that announcement, because I haven't seen her speech and the detail of the speech yet before I came to speak to you. But what we want to do is just make sure that there is... Let me put it this way. What the government have been doing, by using a language of saying that the unions are overpowerful and then pushing unions to one side, it is making them... it's forcing them to take more extreme action in order to get noticed. It's forcing them to cooperate in a way that unions have not cooperated in the past, because they need to do so in order to get noticed. So when Rishi Sunak stood up in Parliament and others stood up in Parliament and started saying, but France has minimum service guarantees. Well, France has 5 times the number of strikes. And they're using as a model a country that has much more fractious relationships between the state and its workforce than we do in this country. So what we need to do is capture what works. And what works is when there is a union that has a good, productive working relationship with the employers, and it is a constant set of negotiations going forward. We know that it drives productivity when that relationship works well. We know that it leads to better levels of happiness and fulfillment in the workplace. All of these things we should be desiring, not fearful of.
I'm just going to try and find the bit in her speech, because I know she's only just finished saying it and she doesn't go into big detail, but she says we'll level up the rules to allow trade unions to use secure and private balloting, and she talks about how the balloting would work. It sounds as if it is going to become easier for the unions to organise to strike. And Jake Berry has just put out a tweet saying, next time you can't see a doctor, your kids can't go to school, your train doesn't turn up, remember UK Labour's plan to give even more power to those who are trying to hold Britain to ransom. You could have written that, I'm sure. You know, you will have, as a party, imagined that will be the response, that the Conservatives will latch onto this now and say, you are going to make striking easier.
Not in a million years will the British public be lectured to about the trains not turning up, about not being able to see a doctor, about industrial action, about nurses, doctors, teachers, and an entire public sector workforce not turning up to work because of industrial relations by this government. You know, so the idea that they can legislate for people to go to work in poor conditions and wages that don't put food on the plates, and they can legislate this way out of their problem, this problem, but not actually do the right thing, which is to sit down with the unions and negotiate their way out of this problem, is absolutely absurd. So Jake Berry can say what he likes, but nobody believes him, because his is the government that's led to more industrial action than we have had since the 1980s. So what we want to do is, yes, we want to make it easier for workers to have their voices heard. Why is it that Tory party members can do an electronic ballot to select their leader, who will be a prime minister for our country, but workers can't express their voice? Very often they're working in dispersed ways across different work floors, factory floors, workers' places, offices. Some of them are working from home. Why is it they can't express their fundamental rights as workers from their workplace or from home in their spare time, but Tory party members can when they're choosing the next Prime Minister? All we want is to make sure that the rights of individuals expressing their rights, fundamental rights, are equal in all circumstances, so that the Tory party will not lecture us on these sorts of things.
Look, there's a poll out today, there's a YouGov poll out that says 54%, they did it for a consultancy, it says 54% of voters say they would definitely not vote Conservative. So on the one hand, you've got people really turned off what has been, you know, what feels like a failing country right now. On the other, you've got Keir Starmer, who is having to constantly correct and reinvent the policies, the promises that he's laid down, whether it's on the 28 billion on green energy, whether it's on the university tuition fees, whether it's kind of shuffling things round on his kind of gender promises and the trans debate, or whether it's the wealth tax. Just last September, a year ago, he was talking about raising income tax. I just wonder what it's like being a front bencher and having to go out constantly and go, I know we said this, but this. I know we promised this, but this. And when you hear something like this, yeah, it sounds great, with loads of applause around it to all the workers sitting in the hall. But how do we know that Keir Starmer's not going to go out in 2 months' time and go, we would have loved to do that, but this?
Well, what I'll say is when we go to the next election, it is likely that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will have been leader of his party for probably 18 months. Keir will have been leader of our party for 5 years. In that 5 years, we've had a pandemic. We've had the invasion of Russia. We've had the cost of living crisis. We've had Partygate. We've had all these scandals in government. We've had.
But this is about
attacks.
Your party
no,
and its priorities.
This is about our party adapting to the moment. Nobody would have thought we had the mini budget, which was less than a year ago. It's coming up to the year anniversary. Liz Truss was Prime Minister this time last year. Who Rishi Sunak wasn't. Why is it that we've had 3 Prime Ministers?
I get it, but what you're not saying is, believe me now, this is the stuff that we're going into the election with. What it sounds like you're saying is all sorts of things shift. They have shifted and they may carry on shifting.
A responsible party adapts to the circumstances. We've had a pandemic. We've had an economic crisis caused by the mini budget last year with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. We've had underperformance and massive fraud against our government. We've had a crisis in standards in public life. We've had espionage attacks against government via Parliament. All of these emerging trends. Of course we have to adapt to these circumstances. And the fact that we are consistently polling so far ahead of the Tories at the moment shows that our ability to adapt to the times shows a responsible government with a good, solid leadership that's forward-looking, based on the circumstances of today, not yesterday, is actually being rewarded by citizens, by voters, by residents. I'm running the political side of the campaign in Mid Bedfordshire, Nadine Dorries' former seat, where the Conservative vote shows every sign of totally collapsing. Now, these are responses.
Go on, talk us through that then, because this is your other hat.
One of my other hats.
How much time are you spending in Mid Beds? What happens on the doorstep now? And you don't need to say, oh, they hate the Tories and they love Labour, but how engaged are people when you knock on a door? Do they want the by-election? It's coming up on the 19th of October.
Oh, they'd like it tomorrow, I think. I think they would just want this to be over, and they have done for quite a while now. Keir appointed me to this straight after she resigned. Nadine Dorries resigned the first time, not the second or the third time, and the other time.
Losers count.
But we saw something really interesting right from the very, very start. Firstly, you asked the question about what people are saying. It is probably the most informed community of voters that I've ever come across, and considering it's 52, 56 villages rather than just one urban area, which is what I'm used to campaigning in myself, it is incredible how informed everything was. And an average conversation goes like this, hi, I'm Peter Carr from the Labour Party, there'll be a by-election. But Peter, will there be a by-election? Has she gone yet? The last thing I saw, she'd said this. People were very, very aware.
So they're clued up about what's happening?
No question. Everyone, it's like a hive mind. Everyone knows what's happening. And then the next bit of the conversation is, do I presume you normally vote Conservative? Oh, yes, absolutely. Do I presume you'll be sticking with them? Oh, goodness, no. And the phrase that keeps coming up, because we do see in standout elections, phrases just come up on doorsteps. The phrase that is coming up on doorstep after doorstep is, they don't deserve my vote. And to hear archetypal Conservative lifelong voters saying they just don't deserve my vote anymore is quite remarkable. So when Keir rang me and said, what's it looking like? I said, you just won't believe me, you've got to come and see it. So he came up and saw from himself, and it's really quite astonishing. For us, this doesn't mean they're all, we are doing very, very well in this, and the only independent poll says that we're 4 points ahead of the Conservatives there. For us, the thing that's so exciting and quite exhilarating is the fact we have the potential to engage and have a conversation and win the trust of people we never have in our whole history, and it's something that we're grabbing with both hands.
But you're also fighting the Lib Dems there. This was, I guess, a moment for what the electorate might call grown-up politics. The Lib Dems think, oh, they're going to get Tamworth, Chris Pincher's old seat. You can take that one in the West Midlands. we've probably got a better chance in mid-beds. Labour should step aside here. A bit of tactical voting. Why wasn't that ever on offer? Why wasn't there a sense of, these parties are working together now because we realise what's at stake?
What you've just done is very, very well and accurately described the Lib Dem approach to these things. I feel my sort of political instincts, my blood starting to rise when you do
scream.
it. Well, simply because I think elections are about voters and residents. They're not about us as political parties. So if there is a community of people and they are saying they want to engage with us, what would it mean for us if we then said, oh, no, we think you should go to another political party because we've decided in a meeting that we had in London
so what would
how
it mean
you will vote?
If the Tories come through the middle then? Will that strategy, that blood-boiling strategy, have seemed...
So look,
right?
I've never supported the idea of a progressive alliance. I think that's politicians and politics telling voters how to vote. It is a perversion of how I see politics in an open democracy, which is we go out there and try and earn every single vote the hard way. And it's sort of trying to avoid the hard choices in politics. But you have to be smart. In Somerset and Frome, we didn't need a meeting with the Lib Dems in a darkened room in London to know that it would be a waste of Labour Party membership money to pile it into a seat that we really could never win. And the fact that the Lib Dems could wasn't something we needed the Lib Dems to tell us. We came to that conclusion ourselves. There were other opportunities for us which we exploited with both hands, which is why we won in Selby. Now, what I don't understand is why that smart approach to politics, that listening and empathetic approach to how you listen to voters in one area, isn't being adopted by the Lib Dems, because they're not just doing what we're doing. And I'll tell you something else we're doing there, because I feel very strongly about this. You asked about voters in Mid Bedfordshire, and I said that they are the most informed that I've ever come across. We have done almost no Conservative attack in that election so far. We have done zero Lib Dem attack, because that is a community that says we want to know the best of political parties going forward because we have experienced the worst. And what I'm seeing from the Lib Dems is deeply personal. It is aimed at the person, our candidate, not at the policies or politics of the person or the party. And I see hints and I sense
Have you said that to Ed Davey? Have you said, what on earth are you doing?
I've not had the opportunity to, but I sense a style of politics by the Lib Dems in Mid Bedfordshire which is reminiscent of the campaign they ran against Peter Tatchell in the 1980s. And I have no doubt, because they are so desperate to make an impact in Mid Bedfordshire, that if our candidate was gay, they'd be doing a family values campaign. That's the level to
You're
which
saying they're homophobic now?
No, I'm saying that they would go nowhere. Moral high ground does not count in the way the Lib Dems are acting in that constituency. And I don't think, because I have respect for Ed Davey, I don't think he realises what is happening locally up there. And I like to think he doesn't. I like to think that they aspire to better. But I've seen statements, and you might well have had one of these emails from the Lib Dems saying that our candidate has character issues to address. Who does that in emails to journalists if there isn't? Because there isn't. So
what are they saying?
What I'm saying is
no. What are they saying with character issues?
I have no idea, and it might well be that he went on a Greenpeace rally, which we knew, in the past, which actually shows he's a passionate guy that wants to get stuck into big issues.
That's not a character issue, is it? I mean, what do they really mean?
No. We have no idea. Genuinely, with my hand on my heart, I have no idea at all what they're talking about. But this is what they're doing, I would never do in a million years, and have not allowed to happen in our campaign, because we are loving every single conversation we're having people, because they want to talk about the future, they want to talk about policies. The policies that keep coming up are developments that's happening locally, no access to doctors.
So can I just ask, the respect for the electorate that you talked about, treating voters as people that you actually want to listen to and give choice to, does that extend to Jeremy Corbyn potentially coming into the mayoral race in London? Would you say, come on in, there's plenty of room for you as well as Sadiq Khan?
Yeah, but I wouldn't stop him. I think that if he...
Is anyone trying to talk him down from that?
I honestly don't know, but look, we do communicate as parties. There's lots of Lib Dem MPs that I really enjoy talking to.
Some of my best friends are Lib Dems.
There are lots of them I enjoy talking to. And actually, I would say that that a couple of them are friends. I've got friends in all political parties, and I really highly value it. And I think the public expect us, when it's possible, to work together cross-party, and I would like to think in times I could point to evidence that I've aspired to do that.
Back to Corbyn then. Are there people saying he must not stand because that will open up London's mayoralty to the Tories? I'm
not going to say that anyone must not stand in democracy, because that would be a strange thing for me to say. I think it would be irresponsible if he stood, but that's because the only thing he could achieve is possibly the height of his ambitions, and I don't think there's any evidence to show that he could win it. But what he could do, possibly, if you look at some of the polling, is he could prevent Sadiq and the Labour Party winning. Now, but again, it is a decision that Jeremy has to come to, having to know those facts. And I would never ever stop anyone standing. In 3 elections that I've stood in Hove, but there's been conversations.
If you weigh those two up, though, isn't that a contradiction? That when Jeremy Corbyn does it, you think it's irresponsible, but when you and the Lib Dems do it in Mid Beds, it's democratic.
Well, so don't put words in my mouth, because I never said it was irresponsible of them to stand. But I think that the tone and conduct of the way they are campaigning is not up to the standards that people in Mid Bedfordshire expect.
No, but what I'm saying is, you said that if Jeremy Corbyn would stand in this one, you said that would be an irresponsible decision. Whereas when it's the Mid Beds question, you're saying, well, that's just what democracy looks like.
No, I said every single person has the right to stand, and I would never stand in the way of that. But I also say that the Labour Party is smart when it comes to where it invests its resources, both of our activists' resource and also the money that people donate to the party and we raise through our membership. So smart use of our money is putting it in places where we can connect with voters, that we can take seats back, that we can strengthen our relationship with the electorate, and we can further our policies and our politics and get people into Parliament and into local government. Unwise use of supporters' money is going into a fight you can't win, particularly if it delivers an outcome that is perverse to what you say you aspire to in public life.
Let's get back to where we started, which was you've only been the Science and Technologies Shadow Minister for a week. And I'm wondering, we talked on the morning of the reshuffle. What does that feel like from inside? Because, you've got people like me badgering you and saying what's happening, what's going on, when will we know, are they changing the top 5 and all the rest of it. And you have become, really expert in Northern Ireland, and you really know your shit there. And then suddenly that's taken away and you're going to something that's brand new. Do you not is there not a bit of you that thinks, I just want to become an expert in this thing?
It's quite complicated.
Or do you leave hints? Do you leave hints for what you'd like to do next?
No. I think when you're at different points on the front bench, or you're aspiring to go on the front bench, you can give hints, because there's a big wide open field and there's a lot of opportunity. I think the further you go up, this is my advice if anybody's listening who's in the PLP or politics, the higher you go up, you've got to speak through delivery and how you act in the current job, and you've got to stop speaking about what you want, because the number of positions starts to contract. I don't know how 23 people around the shadow cabinet table. If you spend your energy saying I want this, but you're not actually smashing the job you're doing, then I don't think that's a great way of going forward. And you just have to trust the leadership, both with the chief whip and the system, and particularly the leader, because the leader will shape all these teams.
So does science suit you? Does it? I know that's not what it's about, but do you feel an affinity with your brief now, or do you think, oh my God, please don't ask me about nuclear fission?
I would always be honest about the things that I'm not fully on top of yet. When you get a brief like this, it is daunting and really exciting in equal measure. Big, really great excitement, really great daunting. And if I'm brutally honest, to start with, for the first few days, it's like you're looking at these pieces of a jigsaw in a pile on the desk in front of you, but you haven't been able to see the picture on the front of the box yet, so you're not quite sure where everything fits together, because my brief covers now everything from the space programme through to 5G and broadband rollout, through to the tech innovation, but also things like social media regulation, then making sure that we are the best place in the world, magnetic enough that these big companies want to come and innovate here, and they have the freedom to innovate here, but they have the freedom to innovate here safely. But then also how we as a government in waiting can use this technology to transform the relationship with people who turn to the state. So it's actually bearing in mind that the government is about 42% of GDP, We need to make sure that we are using and harnessing some of the emerging technologies for the good of citizens in the way that their services are harnessed. So this is incredibly exciting. But of course, I'm very open that I know a fraction of the brief yet.
So is Labour going to take on Musk? I mean, do you think what he's doing at the moment is helpful with the satellite over Ukraine? I mean, are you looking at this kind of stuff and saying, we'll take on these individuals who've got way too much power with technology?
Well, I wouldn't use the language like take on as if this is always adversarial. But if you aspire to run the British government, your primary purpose, your primary function is to keep citizens safe and to make sure that anybody who has access to our economy or society does so in a responsible way. But you don't have to make this every single relationship an adversarial one. It should be one which is based on mature organisations and people sitting around the table. If one of those organisations or people isn't entirely mature, you have to adapt accordingly. But these are people who have created extreme disruption in the way that services and products are delivered, which have provided enormous benefits, but also has thrown up new potential challenges. The role of government is to make sure we mitigate the challenges, but harness the opportunities. Again, we come back to our primary purpose in government straight away is in getting growth into our economy. We're not going to be able to do that unless we have a fantastic relationship with innovators. Some of these innovations that are emerging, such as AI and wherever quantum is going, and they're both in my brief as well, these are things that are going to transform productivity. We need to make sure it does so for the benefit of the workforce and employers and our economy. I'm convinced that we can. We just have to make sure we get it right. Too often, I think, my instincts, if you want my instincts at the very beginning of this job, too often we've slid into the potential dangers that these technologies throw up. I think we really need to also balance that with the opportunities that are out there for our economy, country, society, and us as individuals going forward, because it can be liberating if you look at life sciences and technology.
And it's exciting.
And this is phenomenally exciting. Liberating. Really liberating.
After the reshuffle, the word that everyone used when they looked at the sort of new cabinet was Blairite, centrist Blairite. I sort of think of you as a bit of a Blairite. And it is funny, when I looked at your conference sort of manual thing, the brochure for the October conference, there is a picture where Keir Starmer now looks like the spitting image of Tony Blair, taken from the 97 manifesto, a carbon copy. I don't believe that was a coincidence. Is that wise? Are you now setting Keir Starmer up to be Tony Blair?
What, you think we shouldn't have made him look like a winner? I mean, the trouble with the term Blairite is it's really out of date now, and it's quite hard to know what it means in this particular era. But for me, because I worked for that government for a couple of years as a policy advisor, for me it means work ethic. When I started working for that team in the Cabinet Office 2006 and 2007, my God, I thought I could work hard. But I came out 2 years later being able to work an awful lot harder and an awful lot more focused. We were driven incredibly hard. We had very, very tight direction. We knew exactly where we needed to get to. I remember working on a speech.
But I'm just literally looking at the. I'm just literally looking at the picture and thinking, wow, that is quite the statement that Blair in 97 is now Keir Starmer in 2003-4. It's quite culty.
No. I mean, look. I mean, did you actually look at a photo of Wilson when he was doing his white heated technology speech?
Is he on the brochure next year?
Well, I mean, but it's Keir looks like a winner. He feels like a winner. He sounds like a winner. I went on a trip to Macclesfield to AstraZeneca with him last week to look at life sciences. With the private conversation we have, you have somebody who knows precisely what he wants out of me in this job. He speaks with real clarity for it, incredible sense of ambition. He speaks with real excitement about the potential, but if you ever show a hint of complacency, he comes down on you like a ton of bricks. He's more relaxed than he was a couple of years ago. He is more comfortable with the scale of challenge that he has, but also I think he's more comfortable partly because I think he's got not just his team of advisors around him, including Sue Gray, but also right the way from top to bottom within the party. He feels like we're all working together, and that takes a lot of the heavy lifting off of his shoulders, so he can focus on the pure leadership role. It is, he is someone who feels 2020 is looking forward. And when you look around the world at the other countries that have turned to social democrats, who are achieving really quite astonishing things, I think Keir fits very well into that group of people, and it feels very, very modern to me. It certainly doesn't feel, Keir doesn't feel, sound, look or talk like somebody who is 25 years out of date, which is what Blairism really is. And that's not, disrespectful to Tony if he happens to be listening to this.
He always does. He never misses an episode.
But he... is he one of the people he texts late at night as well? Which is why we have to bring in that rule to stop people, the right to
switch off.
The right to switch off. No, look, we've learnt a lot from Tony and the way that he succeeded in government and the way that he led the party and the government. He's led with clarity. Keir is leading with clarity. Tony he led a broad team. Keir, for all of what you've just said, it's a broad team. And, because we spent the first half of this conversation talking about Angela Rayner's speech today, we are still a broad party that is a progressive party. Whether it's technology, whether it's right, we will make sure that those people who need it the most will get the most support and attention from us. And for those people who are innovating and need freedom in order to do their work, we'll make sure that they get the space they need, as long as they act responsibly. This is a party that is rooted in the 2020s going forward, not in the past.
Peter Curl, thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome back. We're going to talk about spy rings in Westminster, and that is off the back of the 28-year-old who we should say has firmly categorically denied that he is a spy, but it's a young man who works for the China Research Group, set up by the man who is now the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, and it really calls into question who is operating in Westminster that we don't know about, how they got in, through what sort of parliamentary vetting procedures, and whether they are actually able to influence the direction of government or the direction of select committees or the kind of policies that we think are now being made in the name of British democracy. And we're going to talk to Chris Steele, who is sort of paramount in this because he knows the Russia desk of MI6 inside out. He ran that and has come very close, I would say, Chris, to an understanding of this kind of infiltration in so many areas now of public life. So I guess the first question is, were you surprised when this story broke? I mean, we're not naming him, but we've seen sort of, pictures of this very, young man, not charged, as I say, with anything, but potentially they are looking at questions of treason.
Yes, I'm not particularly surprised by it. I think that the problem at the moment is that hostile intelligence services are not just carrying out, as it were, their traditional tasks of trying to steal secret documents and find out where our nuclear submarines are and so on. There's a grey area now which is massively important, which is all about influence. It's all about influencing policy. It's all about plugging in, really, to divisions that may already be there and tensions that may already be there. And this China policy of the government is a classic example of that. The government is clearly divided and has been for a generation between those who are emphasising the importance of a security focus on China and those that see China as a business opportunity. And that's not going to go away. And the Chinese will be hugely aware that that is an area where they can influence for their own benefit.
Except you've got people, stalwarts like Ian Duncan Smith saying we've got to treat China as a threat. Liz Truss, for better or for worse, saying the same thing. We've got to treat China as a threat. They're not going to suddenly listen to a 28-year-old researcher.
I think there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, we could go on to other areas that the Chinese are particularly interested in the UK, obviously relating to Hong Kong, relating to human rights activists from Hong Kong who have resettled here. And you'll recall that only a few months ago, the Chinese government actually put out a bounty on a number of dissidents from Hong Kong that are based in this country, one of whom, Nathan Law, I know quite well. And of course, if what we're being told is true and holds up in court, then that sort of person playing that sort of role in Parliament would have had access to some of these dissidents and will possibly know where they're living, where their movements are and so on, which could be extremely dangerous for those people going forward.
How do you think he got in? I mean, we know how he got in the sense that he just got a parliamentary pass. He went through the vetting procedure. They did the whole thing as normal. I mean, I guess that suggests we're not really asking the right questions, or maybe that it is impossible to ask the right questions.
It's not that we're not asking the right questions, it's a question of resources, I think, probably. I mean, the number of special advisors and researchers and all the rest of it in Parliament is vast, as you'll know. I mean, every MP has several. Now, not all of them are going to be working in these sort of sensitive areas, but even, trade and other things with regard to China are really important, and certainly legislation is. You'll have seen the Economic Security Act that went through recently, which is an important step forward, covers a vast range of different things, including sensitive technologies. And so to vet each of those people to the sort of level we're talking about, the sort of level perhaps that I was vetted to in the past, would be vastly expensive and logistically impossible, I think.
What would you ask me if you were trying to work out if I was a spy? I mean, what are the questions, if you're talking about vetting, yes, you can go back through my whole history. You might find out that I lived in Hong Kong for 6 years. That might kind of ring alarm bells, blah, blah, blah. But what would you really actually be asking me that would open your mind to suspicion of me?
It's fundamentally, about vulnerability, and vulnerability will come from things like economic insecurity, financial insecurity. It's about that plus motivation plus opportunity, and opportunity comes usually in these cases when somebody spent a considerable amount of time inside the country, which I think actually is the case in this instance, although obviously
he spent a lot of time in China.
That's my understanding, yes. And that gives you the opportunity to recruit someone, to cultivate someone, and to train them up in whatever role that you feel that you want them to
So in
perform.
your mind, do you think he was a spy before he entered Parliament? You don't think they sort of turned him once he had his pass?
I think looking at the profile, the highly likelihood is that he was approached when he was living in China. And in fact, I've seen this before on at least a couple of other occasions when associates of ours who also were either visiting China or lived in China were approached by the Chinese intelligence services, all of which were reported, of course, to the appropriate authorities here. But it shows you a modus operandi, quite an aggressive one, but one where the Chinese are much more aggressive on their own soil than they are in the UK.
And how damaging do you think it is, what he's doing? I mean, how much damage do you think has actually been done by his alleged involvement here?
Difficult to say. I mean, I'm not in a position to know exactly what he had access to or who he had access to. Obviously, he was working with or for both Tom Tugendhat and Alicia Cairns, and sort of spoiler alert here in a sense that,
they're probably not party to, state secrets, are they?
I would think they probably are, oh yes. And the fact is that, firms and people like me share intelligence with select committees on Russia, for example, with the ISC when they did their report. And indeed, more recently, we've shared intelligence with Alicia's committee about the Wagner Group, a report on that. And so there's a real concern, I think, amongst people like ourselves that the system may be faulty and may have been penetrated. And that has implications for our own assets and our own security.
Do you think MI6 will be scared?
I think they won't be surprised. I think that, as I said, it's a very difficult thing. A lot of it's about education. It's about sensitising MPs in particular to the sort of threat that we're facing now, which, as I said, is a very nebulous sort of a threat that's difficult to define in many ways. A lot of these things weren't actually illegal in any sense until very recently. We just didn't have the legislative or sort of framework that we needed to try and police this sort of thing. We didn't have a Foreign Agent Registration Act. We didn't have a fit-for-purpose Espionage Act. And the Lobbying Act in itself is deficient, in my view.
So he would go, if convicted, to prison for treason. Is that right?
It's possible. As I say, I don't know the ins and outs of what he had access to. But I think there are...
I mean, that's a very, very rare charge, isn't it? Treason. I mean, I think we've,
It's a rare charge to try and court because, of course, there are all sorts of issues involved in trying these cases. One is that you often reveal your sources and methods in the process. Secondly, you have to have evidential material which is up to 99% proof for a criminal court or a criminal jury. And those things very rarely happen in counterintelligence. Usually it's about monitoring, it's about understanding, and it's about disrupting this kind of activity rather than bringing it into the courts.
Do you think he was acting alone? I think Ian Duncan Smith suggested there was a ring, a ring of spies. I mean, that sounds quite sort of concerted, but presumably they're now assuming that there was more than just him, right?
Well, I think there's a second person that's been arrested, isn't there? And I'm not sure whether that arrest is directly linked, but I'm sure there is a second one. There was somebody in Scotland and somebody down here, I think. And we'll have to see how that plays out. But I would imagine that he certainly had some kind of handler, and that handler may not have actually been in Britain. Clearly, if you were in the counterintelligence investigative world, you'd be looking at this guy's travel records, where he's been spending time and so on, because that's revelatory.
What would he be getting out of it? He'd be getting well paid, presumably, would he? Or
yes, I mean, motivation varies, of course, but usually there are material motivations involved in these cases. There may be some ideological motivation. There may be sinophilia, for example, which does happen from time to time.
A sort of Burgess and Maclean thing, where they end up thinking that they love a foreign power more than they love their own.
Well, or a system, often in that sense. But I think with China, I think one of the big problems, and it's politically incorrect to say it, but it's true, that there have been cases where ethnic Chinese in the West, particularly the United States, have been turned on the basis of loyalty to their original homeland. And that's a big factor. I don't think it's relevant in this particular case.
I mean, your work, I think of you much more as the sort of the Russia expert on all this. Famously, the man who wrote the dossier that was then taken by James Comey, put on Trump's desk in his first week in office, to warn him that Russia was probably looking into his activities in a hotel room in Moscow. And we can all remember the rest of that slightly scatological story. But do you now see, Chris, Russia and China essentially working in tandem? I mean, does being at war with Russia also mean that we are essentially at war with China now?
No, it doesn't. And I don't think actually that there is much history of close intelligence cooperation between China and Russia, which is an interesting limitation, if you like, on their state cooperation and liaison. But what I think there is in a sense learning the lessons from the others. This is all about deterrence in a way. If people think they're going to be caught, if they think they're going to be sufficiently punished, they won't be conducting this kind of operation. And I think particularly in regard to Parliament, I mean, we've talked a lot about things like the appointment of Lord Lebedev and things like that as the son of a KGB officer into Parliament.
Into the Lords. Literally into
for
the Lords.
Life, which is a hugely questionable activity or decision. And the Chinese will have taken note of that. Don't forget that this isn't the first actual case. There was a case of Christine Lee, if you remember, again, I think some months ago, where the security service issued an actual public warning about her activities in and around Parliament. And it does take me back to, I have to say, a report that we contributed to in 2020, if you remember, partly relating to Huawei, but generally relating to state capture by China, elite capture actually, in which some of these things were sort of put forward and were flagged up. And it took 3 years, including on the Christine Lee issue, for this thing to be actually acted upon. So we're very much behind the game on this. If a group of private sector intelligence executives and officers and others can come up with a comprehensive report on Chinese elite capture in the UK, where's the government in all this? And MPs did see that report at the time, and it doesn't appear to have been acted on.
Chris Steele, thank you. Thanks very much. Before we go, I just want to say a really big heartfelt thank you from all of us on the team, both for the messages we've had today and yesterday about our episode on mental health. We really appreciated you getting in touch and saying that had been helpful and valuable, and you were glad that we'd covered it. And really a huge thank you for all of you who shared incredibly personal and often quite heartbreaking stories actually about your own experiences and those of your loved ones. We've been through a lot of the voicemails and messages and the texts and emails that you sent, and it has really helped us understand your concerns and you better. And we just want to say a big thank you for trusting us with those stories. If you haven't heard it, it's still available on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts. And we should say, and tonight you'll also hear an episode of Newsagents USA. Why is Elon Musk getting involved in the Ukraine war? And why is Donald Trump interfering in the judiciary? You can probably answer both those questions, but we're going to have a go too. See you later, and bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.